mystery religions from the East. These were mainly coming from Egypt, Syria, and Persia. You see, these mystery religions centered on a Savior God who supposedly was slain by his enemies and rose from the dead, which we would, from a biblical perspective, regard as sort of a clever impersonation, a clever counterfeit is the right word, of Satan to sort of dilute the message of the Christian gospel. Some of these mystery religions were built around Dionysus, others around Orpheus, others around Attis, or the great mother who loved him and mourned his death and effected his resurrection. Some had Adonis, some Osiris, and some Mithra at their center. And so these religious ideas, both the traditional pagan religions, the Greek philosophies, and the mysteries religions, filled the Roman Empire at this time. You understand, Christianity came into a very religious world, right? It didn't come into what we would consider today secular Europe or the secular Western world. It came into a world that was already filled with religion. Now, the general condition of the Roman Empire in many ways made it a good place for the gospel to take root and to spread. First of all, there was Roman political unity that ensured peace. I mean, it's the famous Pax Romana, right? This peace of Rome, where Rome was the dominant superpower of the world for, almost 800 years, I guess you could say. It was an incredibly long period where Rome ruled over the Western world, and that political unity ensured peace, and it really allowed the gospel to spread. Secondly, the Roman legal system ensured order. Isn't it remarkable? You see this in the book of Acts, where Paul could appeal to his rights as a Roman citizen. That's because there was such an established a legal understanding in the Roman Empire. Thirdly, there was widespread trade across and beyond the Roman Empire, including the trade of ideas. This whole idea of the trade and the merchants going back and forth, not only within the Roman Empire, but also outside of the Roman Empire. I mean, all of this ground, there was trade all over the place, both outside the Roman Empire and within it. But in that whole period there, these merchants who became Christians spread their ideas everywhere. Fourth, there was a generally common language in the empire, and of course, that generally common language was Common Greek or Koine Greek. Not the same Greek of the philosophers, that's known as Attic Greek, but it was sort of a common tongue descended from that more philosophical language. And therefore, when Peter stood up on the day of Pentecost, right? And he preached to this great crowd assembled. There were people there from a huge number of different nationalities, right? But yet Peter could address the crowd collectively in one language. And so this common language made a great environment for the gospel to come into. Fifthly, the empire was religiously pluralistic and generally tolerant. Now, I quoted to you the different religious influences current in the Roman Empire at that time. Of course, I left out Judaism, which was a fourth important influence. But if you want to talk about the four influences of the Roman Empire religiously when Christianity came into it, you have the traditional pagan religions, the Greek philosophies, the mystery religions, and then Judaism. That's a pretty diverse religious environment. And within this, it was conceivable that people were more ready to hear new ideas. And the Romans didn't really care. The Romans weren't out trying to establish so much a state religion that would rule over everything. They were more interested in political order. This is a subject we'll get into in greater depth a little bit later on. And then finally, number 6, there were simply good roads and a good infrastructure for travel. You could travel around the Roman Empire more easily in the year 50 A.D. than you could in the year 650 A.D. Because the infrastructure was just good. It was superior. There were good roads, a good system for travel by ship. It was just a good environment for the gospel to spread readily. So, when Christianity emerged into the Roman Empire, it emerged into a certain time and place that's important for us to understand. First of all, you could say that Christianity begins with this distinct historical figure, who's Jesus Christ, of course, coming into what we would call a distinct historical setting. So at the time that Jesus came into the Roman Empire, first of all, the Roman Empire was young. These were the early days of the empire. You could say that Jesus was born during the reign of the first Roman emperor. Before that, Rome had been a republic, and it wasn't ruled by kings or emperors, but it was ruled by their senate. But the first Roman emperor, Augustus, was the one who was king, or emperor, I should say, more specifically, when Jesus was born. So the Roman Empire was young. The Roman Republic had been around for several hundred years, but the Republic had sort of been absorbed into the Empire because of the different structure. The Empire was dominated by the Caesars, right? These great emperors, these great rulers. The Republic was dominated by the Senate. So the Roman Empire was young. Secondly, Palestine, that's what the Romans called the biblical area of Judea. Palestine had been incorporated into the Roman Empire and ruled as an occupied territory. And you could say that it seethed, it pulsated with resentment and unrest against Roman rule. These people who lived in Judea, again, you can go back and forth whether you should use the name Palestine or Judea. In a modern context, we don't like necessarily the name Palestine because it can be interpreted as a denial to the right of Israel to live in the land. But if you're speaking historically, that's what the Romans called it. By the way, the Romans called it that as an insult against the Jews because they wanted to identify the area that they called Palestine with the Philistines. And Philistia, Palestinia, it comes from the same idea in the Roman mind. In any regard, this is what the Romans called it. And think of it as an occupied territory that, again, was just seething against Roman rule. Thirdly, you could say that the Jewish religious establishment, especially the temple, it was dominated by the party of the Sadducees. There were, point 4, the Pharisees and the Sadducees. The Sadducees were the ones who knew how to pull the political strings. They had the political connections. They had the advantages. But then, fourthly, another prominent party were the Pharisees, who were the spiritual heirs of the movement to keep Judaism pure from the influence of Hellenism. And so you had Sadducees, you had Pharisees. The Pharisees, look, I think we commonly misunderstand the Pharisees. You know what we would consider the Pharisees today? They would be a back-to-the-Bible holiness movement. That's exactly how the Pharisees were understood. Man, they were very interested in the Scriptures, and they were very interested in holiness. We look at the New Testament and see how often the Pharisees are the bad guys, and they are. But we need to understand that they emerged from the context of being the back-to-the-Bible holiness movement guys who became corrupted. And then fifthly, we could also say that there were some minority ascetic movements, such as the Essenes, who were responsible for the Dead Sea Scrolls. They had their thing out in the desert. But as much as anything, we need to understand about this historical environment of the first century that there was a real sense of messianic expectation. Now, if you want a biblical example of this messianic expectation, do you remember in John chapter 4 when Jesus speaks with the Samaritan woman? Go back and read through that conversation one more time, and you'll notice she was expecting the Messiah. You think about